The member for Scarborough East.
Madam Speaker, I'm honoured to follow Minister Mallier and rise in the House to support of the Security for Courts, Electricity Generating Facility and Nuclear Facility Act 2012. As the Minister has stated, we need to modernize the legal framework for the protection of some of our most vital infrastructure and of our courthouse. We know that despite the fact that the Public Works Protection Act is used in a limited fashion, it relies upon on a daily basis to provide security at a nuclear and electricity generating facilities and Ontario courthouses. Madam Speaker, as we move to repeal and replace the PWPA, I believe it's important to look back at the situation that was facing our predecessors when the Act was enacted. The origin of the PWPA goes back to the start of the Second World War. At that time, our predecessors in the House were worried that our power plants may be sabotaged. In fact, our predecessors were so concerned that on September the 19th, 1939, the House convened for an urgent and extraordinary session to adopt this law. Our record shows that the law was adopted in under 3 days and with bipartisan support. I have some quotes here from the leaders of the day, and to give you a flavor of the importance of PWPA at the time. In a Globe and Mail article dated September the 20th, 1939, the Conservative opposition leader, George Drew, was quoted as saying that, quote, he agreed with the Act and would support it. With the country at war, it was necessary to protect hydro, the railways, public works, and industries linked with the war production, end of quote. Premier Hepburn was even more blunt. In that same article, he was quoted as follows, quote, the greatest service a Nazi sympathizer could do would be destroy these plants, end of quote, he said. Fortunately, there were no attacks on our facilities. The war ended, but the law stayed on our books and drew a little attention. In short, Madam Speaker, you might say that the PWPA was an early form of anti-terrorism legislation, but a lot has changed since 1939. For example, the General Criminal Law, modern federal anti-terrorism legislation, and provincial emergency legislation gave our police services the tool to prevent, investigate, and manage the fallout of terrorism. In other words, we would not create any legal gaps for ourselves by repealing the PWPA and replacing with the legislation we have proposed for the facilities that can make use of the current Act. In addition to the threat of terrorism, some stakeholders have asked how the proposed legislation may impact security during the 2015 Pan Am Games and similar major events. Police have powers under the current law and statute states, such as the Criminal Code of Canada, to enable them to maintain public order when this is required. Temporary security for major events is generally dealt with at a local level of police of jurisdiction and affected municipalities. The province will work with stakeholders to ensure an appropriate and effective security plan is in place for the Pan Am Games. Madam Speaker, the bill before the House achieves a balance between the need to provide powers to protect certain facilities where the need for that protection is not questioned, against the desire to use the power in a way that minimally infringes on our civil liberties. The bill certainly responds to a key recommendation made by former Justice Roy McMurtry. In his report, Mr. McMurtry concluded that there was a need for continued protection of these installations, but found the original PWPA to be an outdated legal tool with too broad a definition of what constitutes a public work. He therefore recommended the repeal and replacement of the PWPA. That's what the McGuinty government is doing. Madam Speaker, Ontario is the largest nuclear jurisdiction in North America. There are 16 nuclear reactors capable of generating electricity and supplying Ontario with energy power, our industry, and lights our homes. But whereas nuclear installations in Quebec and New Brunswick are in remote areas, two of our most important nuclear generating stations are in Durham regions, in Pickering and Darlington. Our challenges are different. Securing these facilities require balancing the powers given to these, protecting them with the rights of the Ontarians who reside nearby or conduct recreation facilities near these installations. The replacement legislation will allow for the current use of the power granted under the PWPA for security of the courthouses, nuclear facilities, and large electricity generating facilities. But there are differences in how these powers would be applied, and they are in line with what we have heard from Mr. McMurtry and the Ombudsman in their respective reports. One such area where we have not replicated the powers found under the PWPA is the so-called approach to a prescribed facility. This is particularly relevant for our partners from nuclear sectors. The PWPA currently gives guards the authority to exercise their powers in their approaches to a public work. The approach to a facility was a concern for Mr. McMurtry and civil liberties group because it is vague and hard to define. Under our proposal, guards would exercise the specified powers only on the premises. These powers would not apply off the premises. Since the approach falls outside the premises of the nuclear facility, any security issues should be addressed in partnership with the police of the jurisdictions. Madam Speaker, while we may have heard diverging opinions of these particular issues during our thorough consultations, the proposed legislation has broad support among all key stakeholders. I believe this to be just the reflection of the balanced nature of the bill. We know that the G20 summit in Toronto in June 2010 led to many questions of the usefulness of the PWPA. The security-led event of this magnitude is uncommon, even for a large city like Toronto. The hectic pace of events during those few days in June highlight the tremendous pressure our police services can face in such situations. However, Madam Speaker, Ontarians are protected by some of the most professional and best-trained police officers in the world. What we need to focus our attention on was protecting some of the most vital infrastructure. As the Minister stated, more modern and focused legislations ensure critical facilities can be protected. That is why we are moving with the repeal and replacement of the PWPA. We are doing so in the spirit of openness and transparency. We have concluded with all the sectors involved, from the municipalities to the police organizations, from civil liberties groups to power companies, from Canada's nuclear regulators to provincial ministries and Canadian federal departments. We have been thorough, and that's one of the reasons behind the broad support for this bill. The replacement legislation is focused on what we know to be the current uses of the PWPA for securities at the courthouses, nuclear facilities, and large electricity generating facilities. Owners of the other public works and the police have sufficient authorities to address security needs at these facilities under the other legislation, including the Trespasses to Property Act. It is one of the motivations behind our decision to make the addition of any new category of the infrastructures possible only through legislative amendment. Changing an act is, by its nature, a transparent and open process. The content of any proposed amendments is subject to debates in the House and in committees. Public input will be sought. Once again, Madam Speaker, the process will be open and transparent, and that's essential for us in helping to maintain the trust of Ontarians and for them to know that their safety and the respect of their charter rights is paramount for our government. If a member of the public wishes to conduct business inside a courthouse, or if they wish to enter a nuclear or electricity generating facility, they will have to abide by the security procedures. However, if someone does not wish to subject themselves to these security measures, they have the right to simply walk away. All Canadian provinces have some form of legislation in place that specifically addresses court security and powers of court security guards. Our proposal is generally consistent with the legislation in other Canadian jurisdictions. We have made provisions in the proposed legislation to ensure that PWPA is not repealed before all necessary measures protect the courthouses, nuclear and electricity generating facilities are in place. There will be no gaps in ensuring the safety of these vital facilities while regulations are being videotaped. The accompanying regulations will be developed in partnership with our stakeholders. The ministry will undertake further consultations on the regulations. At a minimum, however, regulation will be needed with respect to the prescribed facilities and the appointment of guards before the repeal can be proclaimed. The regulatory framework will be clearly spelled out. Madam Speaker, in summary, we believe that the proposed legislation strikes a just balance between security and civil rights when it comes to protecting Ontario courthouses, electricity generating plants, and the nuclear facilities. We are making our law more modern to reflect the values shared by Ontarians, values that have evolved since 1939 and the start of the Second World War. We no longer fear the saboteur operating in the dark of night and menacing our power and water treatment plants, our dams, or our bridges. We need no longer depend on our piece of legislation drafted more than 70 years ago to know that our critical infrastructure is secure. We rely on sophisticated police services and more modern legislation to deal with the unexpected. We need to update how we protect the vital installations and civil liberties. Madam Speakers, our proposed bill does that. I enjoin the members of this House to support this legislation. Thank you.